Hello, welcome, and salutations to Den of Otaku, Den of Geek's official anime discussion series, where we talk about all things anime, Japanese pop culture, and basically just all the biggest developments in the industry. I am your host, Daniel Kurland, and in this very special episode, we are talking about Netflix's upcoming animation slate. Specifically, two very cool shows that I think are going to be some of the biggest titles of the fall season. We're talking Zack Snyder's Twilight of the Gods and Tomb Raider, The Legend of Lara Croft. So we're going to get deep into both of these shows, talk about Zack Snyder's surprising relationship with anime, Netflix's evolving relationship with animated video game adaptations, kind of Tomb Raider's legacy as an intellectual property, and as a very special surprise, we have big interviews with the people in charge of both of these shows. That's Zack Snyder and Deborah Snyder for Twilight of the Gods and Tasha Huo for Tomb Raider. So, you excited? I'm excited. Let's get into it, guys. Let's jump in, let's raid some tombs, let's kill some gods, let's go, fellow otaku.
They want war. I will give it to them.
Okay, so first of all, Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder is a very interesting filmmaker. He's become such a fascinating visual storyteller who's developed such like a interesting brand for himself. He has a real devoted fan base. He causes some controversy, but I think like usually in a very good way. And Netflix has kind of gone all in on him. They've done his Rebel Moon films, he's done Army of the Dead with them, and his latest project with Netflix, which I think is an interesting change of pace, but also something that makes sense for his career trajectory, is Twilight of the Gods. Now this is like an ultra-violent revenge fantasy that goes through Norse mythology that follows Sigrid, the daughter of giants, who assembles this really powerful team who are trying to get this deadly relic, the heretic spear, that's powerful enough to kill God. It goes on this ultra-violent journey that, you know, has a lot of Snyder's typical, like, action sequences and just exaggerated characters. Sigrid, I think, is one of the best characters he's created in a long time, female or otherwise. And it's very interesting because, I mean, Twilight of the Gods, I think, is very much in line with what Snyder was doing for 300. There's also a lot of fantasy elements going on too that obviously like lean into the other films that he's done. At the end of the day, I think this is a show that he could have done in live action. So the fact that he's chosen animation for it, I think speaks volumes for where his interests are heading and just what he wants to do as a filmmaker. And it's interesting to see that this is a very mature show. Like it's not at any point trying to pretend that it's for children. Not only is it like steeped in violence, but there's so much sex in this show. Like I was surprised. It gave me a bit of the vapors over how much sex and just like nudity is present in this animated series, which is a bit of a change of pace for Netflix too, but I think this is important to kind of just show people that animation is a valid medium for adults, that it's something that adults can turn to, that it's not just for kids, and that you can tell uniquely mature stories in this medium. And if Zack Snyder does this and makes waves, it will hopefully show other filmmakers too that this is valid territory to explore and to kind of play around in. To get deeper into Twilight of the Gods, I think it's necessary to kind of take a step back and talk about Snyder's relationship with animation. This is definitely the biggest animated series that he's done, but it's not the first time that he's played around with animation. Like, if you remember his Watchmen extended cut, there's the Tales of the Black Freighter animated sequence in that, which is just gorgeous. It's a really beautiful animated sequence. And he even did that Legend of the Guardians, The Owls of Ga'Hoole, which is like a CG children's film about like special owls. So he has played around in animation before, but this is by far the biggest series that he's done. It feels like the most in tune with his sensibilities, and it's exciting to see all these like stock Snyderisms evolve in the limitless nature of animation. And to go one step further, I think Snyder has a very interesting relationship with anime that a lot of people don't recognize. I mean, anime has kind of been steeped in all of his works in both subtle and explicit ways, whether people realize this or not. One of the biggest examples of this is in Man of Steel, the big fight between Superman and Zod, which is constantly being referenced. Jay Oliva, who is Snyder's head storyboard artist and also a director on Twilight of the Gods, he has said that he explicitly referenced the anime Birdie the Mighty as well as Dragon Ball Z when it comes to Superman and Zod's fight. So he intentionally took storyboards from anime and referenced them in this huge fight between these superheroes. And it's kind of remarkable to get a big budget studio blockbuster about superheroes that is using anime as the reference point for its fight sequences. And I think this kind of legitimizes anime and just shows you how much further you can take that medium and what it can do to inform live action content. And I mean, even something like Rebel Moon, his new Rebel Moon films, there's a lot of anime tropes present in those that he's playing around with and finding new life to bring to them. Even something like Sucker Punch, which is like a film that I feel gets denigrated a lot and is seen as like lesser Snyder, the way in which it approaches pain, grief, trauma, empowerment is very similar to how anime like Wonder Egg Priority and Madoka Magica experiment with the same idea. These are magical girl animes that instead of being the typical cheerful, brightly colored series, they have girls that are like literally fighting manifestations of their inner demons and trauma. And honestly, like a live action Madoka Magica movie would be the perfect thing for Snyder to do. Hollywood would probably never be so bold to do a live action Madoka Magica film, but it is so in line with everything Snyder has explored, both with characters, themes, visual storytelling. It would be so cool to see him do something like that, again, helping legitimize live action anime adaptations, and just, it's something that feels very much connected to the type of stories he's been telling, and it shows you that anime has been a big part of the stories that he's telling, whether you've picked up on that or not. I mean, even Army of the Dead, a Netflix movie he did, there was supposed to be an animated prequel series, Army of the Dead Lost Vegas, that is kind of stuck in limbo at the moment. Like, they've written the entire thing, they've recorded a lot of the voiceover, but it's stuck in like a weird production cycle at the moment where it's unclear if it's going to be released or not. Hopefully, if Twilight of the Gods connects with audiences in the way that it's seeming like it will, this could push a release for Lost Vegas to finally happen, and you'll hopefully see more anime adaptations of Snyder's work, because I think they're kind of naturally built for that thing. An anime Rebel Moon would make a lot of sense, but I mean, Sucker Punch would be a perfect property. I mean, it makes sense for Snyder to kind of focus on the properties that he created and that he explicitly owns, rather than some of the other sandboxes that he's been playing around in. But they're such a natural fit for anime, and it'll be so exciting to see what he does after Twilight of the Gods, now that he's kind of started to really scratch this animation itch and push it to exciting places. And to kind of build on that, we have an interview with both Zack Snyder and Deborah Snyder where they get deep into Twilight of the Gods, talk about what this series means to them, why it was a story that they explicitly wanted to tell in animation versus live action, and just what their relationship with anime is and how it's informed their decisions as filmmakers and producers. So let's take a look at that. Welcome, everyone. This is Daniel Curling with Den of Otaku with two very special guests. We have Zack and Deborah Snyder here. Thank you so much, guys.
It's awesome to be here.
It's so cool to be talking about Twilight of the Gods. And just first off, like, this show has had such an interesting development. It seems like you've been working on it since 2019. Can you just talk about how the idea came to you guys in the first place?
Jay and I had been talking about doing a series, some animated series together. Basically, we both love Norse mythology, and we were like, okay, it'd be cool to do something in that world. We also had been working at the same time on the Army of the Dead animated series, which has yet to be created. But those were the two things we were kind of talking about. Netflix at the time was like, okay, yeah, these sound like cool things. What is the Norse mythology idea? Once we were sort of given that assignment, like, what is it? I think that's when we kind of sat down and talked it out and kind of came up with this, what the series is now. It's just, evolved kind of nicely over time. What it's allowed, I think, is this design incubation period where we were able to really, because of the pace, we were really able to experiment and sort of go down a lot of different avenues with design and kind of then really sort of hone in on what we wanted to do look-wise with the show.
One of the best things about animation is that you can take it in so many different directions, and the show does have such a distinct visual style. It kind of made me think of like Gendy Tartakovsky stuff with Samurai Jack and like Primal.
Sure.
And was that always the look you kind of had for it? Did it go through some kind of
No, it went
shifts?
through a huge evolution, I think. I have drawings of Sigrid in many different forms. She kind of looks the same, like the hair and the braid and the whole, like that's kind of always there.
It's such, I think, a cool time to see animation kind of get reclaimed for adults and to have kind of more mature animated stories being told. You guys definitely don't shy away from that, and it's great to just see that get embraced. Was that always the plan? Like, was there ever a version of maybe like a more sanitized PG version of the show?
No, I don't think so, because the amount of time that I had to work on this, as far as my commitment to it, and you can imagine that the time commitment on a show like this and at, the budget level and everything like that, what I just felt like the only thing that would interest me and the only reason for me to do it at that scale for that long would be if we were just doing it our way and something really cool and crazy. And so, and Netflix was on board from the beginning. They were like, okay, because I just was like, look, I really want this to be like very adult, sexy and violent and just go all the way. And they were like, yeah, we're down for that.
I think there's an expectation if Zach's going to come on board, that it's going to be a certain way. But I also think what's great, what Netflix is doing right now that not a lot of people are doing, is they're creating such varied content. They're doing a bunch of like programming that's geared for kids, and then they have a really great adult animation audience. And I think that it's not just, I think it traditionally, when you think of adult animation, I think of it's comedic, everything. And to do something that's action and fantasy and drama, yeah. I think is really exciting, and that's breaking new ground.
I was going to say exactly. It really, I think, helps the medium when there's storytellers like the both of you pushing it to new places. Like you do that, more people want to do that too, and you start a whole trend. Like it's great.
No, because you have to really train an audience to be able to experience adult content that way, right? Like they have to watch it and go, I can be invested in this, and it's not a cartoon, it's not for kids. It's okay to like give my entire sort of dramatic sensibilities over to this thing that I have maybe not have experience with in my adult life, and I think that's going to be interesting to see how people are able to just enjoy it, because I think it's really there for you if you want to go all the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I feel like the actors, like in their performances, like Sigrid and Leif, like the performances that Sylvia and Stuart did are so grounded, and the nuances are there. They gave the same performance, and that's how we treated it along the way. Even the music, we wanted the score to feel like dramatic, and it could be a score for a live action. Like we took everything very, seriously.
Well, and this isn't the first time that you've both played around in animation before too. Like even you mentioned Army of the Dead Las Vegas, but also like Legends of the Guardians and even the Tales of the Black Freighter on Watchmen. Did doing that previous work help prepare you for this at all? Like were there lessons you learned from those other productions that you could apply here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that now our education is not, there's plenty more to learn, of course, as there always is, but like just as far as like the basic production pipeline, though it was completely different from Guardians, I did benefit from having gone through Guardians and that sort of super 3D pipeline where, the animatics are like weird shapes moving around, where this is all kind of drawn animatic storyboards, which are really, I find really fun and cool to do. And so, so it was that part was really interesting. And I do think now, though we are, ready to make some more of these if need be, or different ones. But I think that our team is really solid, and I really thought everyone did an amazing job and really made my job easier, just kind of wanting to express through these images this story, getting to it was really fun and exciting rather than like, pulling teeth or it's cool because the other thing we were talking about is that like when we do a drawing for a movie, it's an approximation of what might happen because the actors are going to have their own ideas and however the wire work is going to be or whatever the shot is. But the cool thing about this process is that this is you could draw it and then you can make it, which is really really cool.
Kind of just off of that too, like I know this isn't an anime, but I'm curious what your relationship is with anime, and I know that Jay Oliva, the co-creator and like director, that in Man of Steel, like some of the storyboards in the Zod fight were inspired by like Birdie the Mighty and Dragon Ball Z. Have you been able to use anime as like an inspiration in any of your other films, or?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just for me. It's like I enjoy watching it, so it just ends up, if you like say you watch all of Demon Slayer, by the end of it, you've got a lot of those images that are in there.
Yeah.
So like, if you wanted some detail, the way it's drawn, the way it's rendered, you might go like, oh, that was cool. Maybe we can do a version of that. Or even if you're not super conscious of it, it's going to be there. So yeah, I think that, and I do think that anime is an amazing place for sort of visual storytelling. Obviously, it's very incredibly talented storytellers working in that medium, and it's just like it's you'd be mistaken not to give it its full value because it's amazing.
And we have 2 kids that are constantly watching
obsessed,
it, so it's
obsessed.
on in the house a lot. So there's a lot of anime.
The show has so many great characters. You've mentioned Sigrid a bunch. Just can you talk a little on the development of that character, or if like you channeled any other strong female characters from your films into that individual?
I don't think so. I think she was written, we knew what she had to do, as far as her journey goes, and it was always, built on Sigrid. And so we really, and that's the other great thing about series is that you have a lot of time. You have time to tell her story and tell it in a lot of detail. Yeah, she can really be kind of fully realized. And that was really fun for us to kind of have this strong central female character that was really, broken in some ways and incredibly powerful in others, and really be nuanced and subtle and incredibly committed to a relationship but willing to sacrifice it, and just all these incredible things. And like I said, Sylvia did an amazing job sort of rendering it. There's that whole thing about this kind of Scandinavian cool that also, when you fire it up though, the passionate side of it becomes elevated by the sort of coolness of the sort of day to day. It's like, I don't know. I just really thought it was awesome.
She also, it's interesting because she comes from giant folks. So she's small.
Sigrid does not. Yeah.
But she is such a big personality that you feel like her character is actually larger than life. That was something that was important. She's like such a great warrior. And
it's a big part of the story in some ways that, she's looking for a place to fit in because, even though she was raised by giants and lives among giants, she was always the smallest, and it was hard. Like, her feet never touched the ground in any of the chairs. And,
she never was at home when she was at home.
That was a big thing, and I think that when she meets Leaf, at one point in the series, he gives her a present that like makes her feel like she's found a home. Those kinds of things where we can really take time and sort of go on these kind of flashbacks and other threads. It's really fun.
The way you tell a story in a serialized show is totally different, and it's just exciting to see what you can kind of do with character development or just how you reveal stuff to people. And
also seeing the gods, like we got to really play around with our version of Thor and Loki, and that was really, really fun to explore those characters.
Yeah, the Allfather, and it's just a lot of really great. I've always been a huge fan of Odin, and like how do you show him the different versions of Odin, and really sort of, it's fun to see. Also, Odin has a huge arc in the series as well because he's at this sort of pivotal moment in his existence where, the gods were on the, verge of Ragnarok, maybe coming. And it's just interesting to see how the gods are dealing with this, who accepts it, who doesn't accept it. Do the gods understand what Ragnarok could mean? Do the gods understand that immortality is a curse or a blessing? Like there's a lot of fun in that. Is mortal life more important than immortal life because it ends, and its end gives it significance. But if you're immortal and you never end, then you're just, there's no way to shape your existence. And so it's like it's really cool to sort of see the gods grappling with like being immortal is not that awesome.
Right. It's such a fun twist on
Yeah.
what they're used to. Yeah. I definitely saw like a lot of 300 in this show, and almost like a more kind of like fantasy driven version of that. They've recently announced that like a 300 series might be happening, and just was that show on your mind at all during this production?
No, not at all. Yeah, I guess I have a particular way of rendering action, and it just ends up maybe having a sort of vocabulary that's similar. But yeah, no, not at all. If anything, it would probably influence the series now that I've done it, because there's no way it exists now, so I can't.
Now that you've played around in animation a little more, there's like a lot of IP getting turned into animated series, like they did Scott Pilgrim, and there's like a Suicide Squad anime coming out. Are there any previous films of yours that you think would lend themselves to like an animated series? Like Sucker Punch, I think, would be so fun.
Oh, that would be
Great idea. Sucker Punch animated series. Yeah, let's do that.
Wasn't that so cool? I mean, I think a lot of people take for granted that a lot of filmmakers have children who watch anime, and then just through osmosis, they're watching anime with their kids, they're picking up on these visual cues, storytelling ideas, and it's just getting baked into their storytelling, whether they realize it or not. So it might seem like a little redundant or that it goes without saying, but I think Snyder watching anime with his kids does inform a lot of the decisions he's made. He's not the only filmmaker doing this. And like I said, it'll be very exciting to see where animation continues to go, both from him and from Netflix, and that it will continue to be this medium that's built for adults, that animation can really succeed for adults, and that it can be pushed to its limits, that it can be full of sex and violence. And it's very cool that Netflix is embracing that through visionary storytellers like Zack Snyder, like Deborah Snyder.
How much longer can you persevere?
Now, to shift over a little bit, one of the things that Netflix is doing so well that I think is so much better than every other streaming service is their approach to animated video game adaptations. There's never been more video game adaptations going on at the moment. Every streamer has kind of tried to play around in this field, but Netflix has done such a good job explicitly when it comes to animated adaptations of video games. They have Castlevania, which has done so well that it even has several spin-offs now. There's Cyberpunk Edge Runners, Onimusha, Tekken Bloodline. The Witcher even has an anime adaptation too. There's Captain Laserhawk, a Blood Dragon remix. Just to take a second here, Captain Laserhawk, a Blood Dragon remix, is a series that I've told people about, and people still don't believe it exists. This show shouldn't exist, but it's such a cool, weird approach for video game adaptation in anime. It basically takes a bunch of Ubisoft properties, whether that's like Assassin's Creed, Splinter Cell, Far Cry, Watch Dogs, even something like Rayman. And like Rayman is in this series doing cocaine off of women. And it's such like a bold, bonkers mashup of all these Ubisoft properties in a mature setting. It shouldn't exist, but it's so cool. And I think that kind of proves that Netflix is interested not just in doing straight up adaptations of video games, but really taking these properties, letting them breathe, and doing weird, exciting stuff like Captain Laserhawk. And it's becoming one of the best places that if you want to do an anime adaptation of a video game, Netflix is where you go. I've mentioned it before, but they're doing a Devil May Cry anime that's coming out too, and they're definitely not slowing down in this regard. And kind of the latest version of this is their new animated series, Tomb Raider: The Legend of Lara Croft. I think Tomb Raider is a really smart project to focus on. I mean, what's going on with all of these anime adaptations of video games is they're a smart way to bring in audiences that necessarily aren't anime fans or even animation fans, but you have this built-in audience that like the video games and are willing to take that leap because they like this world, they like these characters, and they want to give it a chance in a new medium. So I think it's very smart what Netflix is doing when it comes to these animated adaptations, and Tomb Raider is a smart project for them to focus on because of its legacy. Tomb Raider has been around for close to 30 years. It has tons of video games, reboots of video games. There's movies. I mean, there was a time when the live-action Tomb Raider film was the highest-grossing video game movie of all time. There's the new movie with Alicia Vikander that came out. There's Tomb Raider comic books, even comic book crossovers with series like Witchblade. And there's like an upcoming live-action Tomb Raider show that Phoebe Waller-Bridge is involved too. So Tomb Raider is clearly a property that we keep returning to, that we want to return to and do new things with, and the idea of doing an animated series of it just makes a lot of sense, I think. And a lot of that also comes down to Lara Croft herself. I mean, Lara Croft and Tomb Raider came around at a time when video game female protagonists were few and far between. I mean, you had your Sonya Blades and your Chun-Li's, but it was very rare for there to be like a strong, empowered female video game protagonist. And Tomb Raider really excels in that department and has turned Lara Croft into this archetype that has made other video games possible. It's inspired so many other series, and she's proven herself to be so much more than just this female Indiana Jones archetype. And Tomb Raider and Lara Croft are both just great fits for adaptation. You can do so much with them. And so what's going on with Tomb Raider, The Legend of Lara Croft, is it is playing with the dense lore that's being created through these games. The series tells its own story, but it also kind of connects the mythology between the original Tomb Raider games and the reboot games and brings them together. And the show has a very interesting energy to it. Like, honestly, the first thing I thought about with this show is it has a very Saturday morning energy to it, almost like the old Jackie Chan Adventures cartoon. It's very like wuxia coded with these like watercolor palettes. It has a gorgeous animation aesthetic, and all of this, I think, helps that it tells these episodic stories, but also gets into like a more serialized narrative that plays out over the course of the season. And it does a good job at celebrating just what makes Tomb Raider so unique. I mean, you get a lot of adventuring, you get a lot of just like gritty action stuff, but also just it gets into the supernatural elements of the series. You have Lara Croft fighting monsters, ghosts, there's all these booby traps that she has to go through, and it's a show that really celebrates like her actual tomb raiding abilities. You see her develop as an adventurer, but also an archaeologist, and it really celebrates what makes Lara Croft special as a character. You even get like all these subdued, more muted moments where you see her out of the tombs and just like being a person with the people that are important to her, which is something that I think can kind of fall to the wayside in the Tomb Raider video game. So it's nice to see that get some love here as well. And something that I think the Tomb Raider animated series does so well that I think is kind of neglected in other video game adaptations is it really feels like a video game. Not only do you get segments that have Lara Croft raiding tombs and being a great adventurer, but there are these like big action sequences that feel like boss battles. Like there's a real boss battle quality to different episodes in the show, and there's these action sequences that truly feel like QTE segments, those like quick time event bits where you have to push buttons to successfully pull off maneuvers and just like video game actions. That is really baked into the show, and I've never felt that before when watching a video game adaptation, that it has these kind of segments where you're like, oh, this is where the boss battle would be, this is where the quick time events would be, and that's so cool. And I think it does a really good job of just not adapting a video game, but feeling like a video game, albeit in the medium of serialized animated series. It also just really respects like archaeology and history as a whole. All of the relics that Lara Croft finds in this show are real relics with real history behind them. Like, it's so fun that you could literally pause an episode, do research on these relics, and learn more about it. And I think it's really cool that it's a show that isn't just indulging in adventure or these heightened elements, that there is a real sense of history behind it that celebrates actual history in a way that can go neglected or isn't always present. And in kind of like a meta level, it's doing the same thing with the Tomb Raider property. It's a show that explores Tomb Raider, celebrates Tomb Raider, but also like has its history front and center and shows why it's important as a cultural artifact. I think that's just so cool at the end of the day. And so to get a little deeper into Tomb Raider, The Legend of Lara Croft, we have an interview with Tasha Huo, the show's showrunner, head writer, who's also just a huge anime fan. She's a writer writer on Destin Daniel Cretton's upcoming live-action Naruto movie, and so she just gets into like what Tomb Raider means to her as a franchise, what she was interested in accomplishing in this animated series, and just how anime has been a guiding force through her life and informed a lot of her decisions as a storyteller. So, Tasha Huo, let's give it a look. Hey there everyone, this is Daniel Curlin with Den of Otaku, Den of Geek's official anime and animation discussion series. We have a very special guest here, Tasha Huo of Tomb Raider, The Legend of Lara Croft, showrunner, executive producer, writer, and just thank you for being here. It's great to have you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. To start things off, what is your relationship with Tomb Raider? Like, were you a fan of the 90s games? Did you get into the reboot trilogy? Like, when did you start falling in love with that character?
Definitely 90s.
Yeah.
I was definitely a little girl playing these games. And all the way through I've played everything, even the mobile games. And yeah, so I've been in a relationship with Lara Croft for a while.
I love that, and I think it's so cool that both Tomb Raider and Lara Croft have been around for like 25 years, that people keep reimagining the character, whether it's like the movies or, you know, there's like a live action series coming out too. Mm-hmm. And just why do you think Tomb Raider and Lara Croft have endured for so long and have become these kind of like cultural touchstones?
I think it's multifold. She is such an engaging character. I mean, similar to Indiana Jones, whom she's really based on, is funny and incredibly capable. And that was always, at least when I was growing up, absolutely rare. We had Xena and we had Lara Croft.
Yeah.
And that was about it. And so, I mean, at least for all of the women that I've talked to, and we're mostly women on the production side of Tomb Raider who are absolute fans of the games growing up, there's something that really touched them, unlike a lot of other games. And I think it's because it's being able to see a woman do these things that were so amazing. And then I think the other part of it is, at least for me anyways, the stuff that I love is the nerdiness of the history and getting to really deep dive with Lara Croft into a lot of these mythologies that we're not familiar with, that really take something very grounded and make it feel big and magical and epic. And that's just all the history stuff that I love. I just geek out about that.
Yeah, the series has established such deep lore, and it seems like this series is kind of going to bridge the gap between the reboot games and the original games. And just, was it a challenge to figure out where you wanted to set the series in the timeline and what kind of like characters and lore would be advantageous to the story you're telling?
I don't think it was a challenge. It almost felt like an obvious pick, which is after the Survivor series, we've seen sort of the origin story of Lara. We've seen her as a college kid, basically, who gets in way over her head. And she's basically fighting to survive over the course of those 3 games. But how does she become the Lara Croft we knew when we were kids? Mm-hmm. Like, that question just always fascinated me. And doing a show that explains that walks us through that, not only in the connections that she makes that you see playing out over the course of the games, that you're like, well, how did she know that person? That random like temple in the middle of nowhere, how did she know that even existed? She's been here clearly. How? When? Why? Like, those things I wanted to see in the show, but also her confidence and the way she goes from that young college woman from the Survivor series who's just trying to survive to the superhero confident Lara we know from the games. Like, that's exactly the show that I want to watch.
There's such an interesting video game adaptation renaissance going on now with like Last of Us and Castlevania and just Fallout, and all of those shows kind of take different approaches, and I really love that you're not just adapting one of the games, which you could have done and would have been great, but the fact that you're telling these kind of original Tomb Raider stories feels like such a fun expansion to what's there.
I didn't want to just tread what we've seen in the video games before. We've been there, we've seen that. Again, it's all the questions I had when I was playing the game, I want the show to answer. Kind
of beyond Tomb Raider itself, what were some of the other influences on the series and its tone? Like, it felt to me, there's kind of this very, like, Saturday morning energy, almost like Jackie Chan Adventures to it, or in, like, a wuxia kind of, it's just a great, like, vibe going through the whole thing.
It's interesting because we really wanted to hit the action-adventure tone, for sure. But we didn't want it to be that light. We didn't want to be that light all the way through because Lara, off of the heels of Survivor series, is dealing with a lot. Like the apocalypse, she almost just ushered in the apocalypse due to her grief. So we have to deal with that. And so that's where we start Lara, is in that kind of fragile place. And so it's a show that's both grounded in a lot of the action movies I love, which, growing up, the Mission Impossible movies. Indiana Jones is definitely an influence in there. I grew up watching, Lethal Weapon, those kinds of, there's like the quippiness that Lara has alongside that capable action. And then, of course, our animators were inspired by all kinds of anime as well, that they were... And inspired by the more grounded anime, I think is something they were talking about a lot when we were having conversations creatively about this. It's because, while it does feel, the action should feel big and the history and the story should feel epic, there's something very small about her personal story that we want to allow you to access. And so it's sort of this fun marriage. When you think about tone, it has this kind of Saturday morning cartoon feel, but it also is really dramatic at points. And we're really sad. Like, hopefully you cry in this show.
Powerhouse Animation Studios that does the show, I think all their work is so great. And this does, like, as you were saying, has like almost like watercolor aesthetic to the show at times. It's really beautiful. Just... Was that a work in progress to figure out what the look was going to be? Did you go through different styles for the show?
I wish I could say yes, because that's just more interesting. But as soon as we got backgrounds back, we were all blown away. They nailed it immediately, because again, they got that sense of this has to feel huge and epic, and then we're putting this small story through that space. And so I almost had never had any notes on the backgrounds. They just hit it out of the park. They were always gorgeous and big and aspirational, and I just want to go to all of them.
Yeah, it is such an interesting property that the backgrounds are as important as the characters and the action and all that other stuff too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think something that your show does very well that's not necessarily present in a lot of other video game adaptations is that it feels like you're playing a video game at times. Like, you have sequences that are like, oh, this is where the QTE sequence would be, or like, this is where the boss battle would happen. And was that kind of a conscious effort as you were writing the show? Was that on your mind at all?
I think it was sort of an inherent thing that I felt as I was writing, because, again, I am such a fan of the video games, and I play video games so often that sort of arc felt right to me. And I didn't want to shy away from that, because there is something to coming from a video game and getting to sort of experience a similar feeling. Like, you're never going to have the same feeling as a video game. You're a first person, you're there, you are Lara Croft. You're not going to be Lara Croft in this show, but I wanted to bring you as close as we possibly could to that feeling and to that kind of the arcs that she always has in the game.
I think you do a really good job of how episodes will showcase Laura's like gear and her skills and her tomb raiding abilities, but then you also have like the whole magical and mysticism side too, with like ghosts and otherworldly monsters. Was that like a fun kind of to balance those extremes?
So fun. Again, we really wanted to play on the realism of things. So when we get to her gear, it needs to feel usable. There are so many conversations, which honestly I was like, I think we could just cheat this a little bit. They're like, no, this has to be an absolutely functioning belt. This has to absolutely functioning weapon, and the screws have to be exactly where they should be if this was to all of that stuff. So it was really, really, really well thought out. And then to me, that's part of the fun of Lara Croft, is that balance between getting to have very real moments juxtaposed against huge, crazy, statues coming to life, and you're suddenly in, an ethereal space and you don't know how you got, there's so much of that, like you say, that mysticism that happens in Lara Croft, that we wanted to marry those two, but still feel like this could happen. And that was always a conversation we had, is this needs to feel as real as possible, even though there's magic. How do we do that?
Well, kind of off of that, too, I think you find a really good formula of, standalone episodic stuff that has light serialization elements to it. Talk about kind of, figuring out that structure of doing stories like that as opposed to, just one huge mammoth adventure that Laura's on from the start.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It was very important to us for it to not feel plot-driven. And so while we had this bigger mission that she's on, that every episode she's getting closer to, sometimes she does kind of take a little bit of a break or a right turn, and she's still on the A story, but she's really repairing her relationship with a friend that she hasn't seen in a long time. I wanted to allow us to do things we didn't do in the video games, and that became very important to me as a game player, because this is a chance to see Lara do these offshoot side quests that you may not get to do in a video game because you're always on the A story. That was always sort of a no-brainer to me, and it's also about bringing out Lara's humor again, I think we lost in the Survivor Series, which is fine with me. I enjoyed that. But we have to move Lara to who she used to be. And so getting to have the more human moments is going to move us in that direction.
There's a line in the first episode that really stood out to me that says, like, history doesn't always tell us the truth. And that kind of almost feels like it could be the mission statement for the season. And just why, can you expand on that a little? Or just like getting into that side of archaeology too, and that there is, you know, you're not always learning the truth when you go into these stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that, because that was actually a really important line for me as well, particularly for Lara, because what she's learning in the first season and what she'll continue to learn, I think, is that what she thinks happened isn't really what happened, and she needs to get to the bottom of her own truth. And in particular, when she's saying that line, the subtext is really about Roth and her father, and what she thought was true with them is actually not the full truth. And I need to look more into that in order to realize who I am separate from them. That also holds for just history at large. And I think what Lara will be pursuing as an archaeologist over the course of the show is, we're always told these things, or we always have these assumptions about this history. What is the actual truth behind all of that? And to me, I mean, as someone with a degree in history, that's always what fascinated me the most, is the storytelling behind what we thought or assumed was true. So Lara's going to get into a lot of that.
That was such a fun part of the games as well, that you could find some little tangent and then learn that, oh, that's true. That is a real thing. And to have that in the show too, I think is so important.
My hope is that people can watch it, Google, what the heck was that was mentioned, and then go down their own rabbit hole that I also went down.
This next thing, I'm not sure if you can say much about it, but I heard that you're like maybe doing writing on the upcoming live action Naruto movie. And that is just so cool.
Yeah.
Was the adaptation work you did on Tomb Raider like helpful to do something like Naruto? Or are you a big Naruto fan?
Yes, and yes, it's all helpful, because Lara Croft is about this huge world. You could, as you said, you could enter it at any point. Why enter it here? And for me, it was finding the smallest possible story to tell, meaning the story we can relate to the most, the story that felt the most human. And it's so easy, I think, in these big worlds. Naruto is a great example too. They're just huge. There's so many rules and the magic and everything, all the different villains you could possibly enter. And it's finding, what do I emotionally care about? And it's those are the conversations you have first. And as soon as you find out what that kernel of emotion is, the thing that's going to make me cry or fall in love, just lean in to what this story and this character is, that's where I need to start the story. And that's the arc I need to pay attention to. And then the world will honestly, it will take care of itself. If you love it enough and if you know it well enough, which we did, particularly in Tomb Raider, then it will take care of itself. It's finding that story through it.
That's great. I'm so excited for that. It seems like it's going to be amazing. Yeah.
Your lips to God's ears.
And just last question, do you have a favorite piece of Tomb Raider media? I know that's like asking like your favorite child, but is there one that really stands out to you?
I think Legend is maybe one of my favorite games. And I think Legend because of like the nostalgia of it.
Yeah.
I actually replayed it just before writing the show again, just to like get back into it. I was like, oh my God, how did I beat these levels when I was younger? I don't understand. But that's such a good game. And then the Survivor Series 2013 for me and Shadow are some of my favorites for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Tasha.
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
was great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How much longer can you persevere?
Cool. I mean, this show is very cool, but I think it's always interesting when you can get a little deeper into the insight behind it, the psychology behind making a show. And Tasha is just someone who truly loves this property and character, and it's exciting to see what she's going to do with the live-action Naruto movie, what she'll continue to do as a storyteller, and just what Tomb Raider will inspire Netflix to do when it comes to its upcoming video game adaptations. I mean, Tomb Raider is such a big series, it's going to open a lot of doors for them, and if this show connects and gets future seasons, who knows what they're going to tackle next. I think that's so cool, and there's really going to be no end to Netflix's animated video game adaptations. And so before we go, we're going to give you your classic Big Three segment. For those of you that don't know, Big Three is where we kind of just shine a light on 3 special anime properties. There's so much anime out there, it's impossible to watch it all. It's easy for shows to slip through the cracks. And this is our way of kind of just putting a spotlight on 3 special shows. And because we've been talking so much about Netflix's animation slate, we're doing a special Big Three Netflix edition. These are all shows that you can watch on Netflix. As soon as this episode's done, you can pull up Netflix and stream these shows and just have fun binging the anime, guys. First off, we have The Disastrous Life of Saiki K. This show is just so funny. It's technically a shonen series, but it really indulges in the gag comedy trope. It focuses on Saiki K, Saiki Kuso, who is this prolific esper. He has incredible telekinetic and psychic abilities, but instead of using these powers to like take over the world or throw his weight around or even just be like destructive, he really just wants to keep a low profile. This is a guy that just wants to relax, stay out of the spotlight, just enjoy his coffee jelly and call it a day. And it's such a fun subversion of the typical powerful psychic trope, that this isn't someone who wants to be special. He really just wants to be anonymous, stay out of the spotlight and not get any attention, and he uses his psychic powers to do that. So it's such a fun idea that really is just hilarious at the end of the day. It has like a good cast of supporting characters, a lot of whom require Saiki's help, so he's using his powers to like help out his friends, which sometimes puts focus on him, which he doesn't want. It's so easy to go through this show. Like, it was initially released as these like short 5-minute episodes that have now been compiled into half-hour episodes. So there's a very fast pace to them that you can go through an episode and get these 4 or 5 different segments. Even if you want to just watch 1 or 2, pause it, do something else, you can do that as well. It's so funny. Like, I don't know anyone who's watched this show and doesn't like it. It's so easy to fall in love with these characters and just the silliness of it all. And there's like a special wrap-up special to it that kind of gives closure to it, so it's not just a bunch of frivolous stories that go nowhere. Like, there is an end point to the show that gives you closure and is really cathartic. Even as like a live action movie that does a really good job capturing the energy of the show and is like one of the better live action anime adaptations as far as I'm concerned. So just The Disastrous Life of Saiki K. Very cool.
Now, you might choose a pet based on the impression they give, like, this dog seems loyal or this cat seems really loving. But that's just you projecting your own desires.
Don't touch me so casually, female Homo sapiens.
That's what he's really thinking.
The next show is Mononoke. That is not Princess Mononoke, but Mononoke. This is such a fun, different, pure vibe kind of show that I think has fallen through the cracks and not enough people know about it. There's a movie for it coming out now that's in Japan at the moment and is going to be coming to North America. So I thought this is a great way to kind of get informed about Mononoke before the movie comes out. So when the movie's in theaters, you can be like, I know what this is. I know what's going on here. I'm gonna see this movie. So what Mononoke does is it kind of takes like a mystery procedural approach to demon slaying. It follows a protagonist who has no name. He's just known as the medicine seller. And basically he goes through different communities looking for Mononoke, which are these evil spirits that have attached themselves to negative personalities. And before he can take out his sword and exorcise them, he first has to understand the truth, reason, and form behind them all. So it's not just like a demon slaying show. It really gets into the psychology of these characters, why they're being afflicted, what is going on here. And I think that's such an interesting approach for this type of show. It really succeeds as a procedural. There's only 12 episodes, so it's easy to just binge through it. It has a gorgeous animation style. It's such a pretty show to look at, and it really just trusts its visual storytelling. Like, there's a bunch of episodes where they're quite sparse in dialogue, and you can just go on atmosphere alone and really have fun with this show. And it really just excels with what it's doing and feels different than a lot of similar programs. In spite of how there's only 12 episodes, it does kind of get into smaller, shorter story arcs. It does work as an episodic show that you can really just come in and watch random episodes and enjoy it. But it's such a different approach to how to do a procedural, how to do a demon slaying show. It's gorgeous, it has fun vibes, and it's really just something different that I think deserves a little more attention. It's very cool that it's on Netflix.
まやかし黙っていろ まだ芝居の途中だ。
And the last thing we'd like to highlight is Mobile Suit Gundam. Gundam, as we've said before, has kind of become synonymous with the giant robot mecha genre. There are more than 50 Gundam anime, movies, video games out there. It's been around for nearly 50 years. It's the most prominent giant robot series that's out there. We've talked about it before in different capacities, but we would like to shine a light on the very first Gundam series, which has kind of retroactively been known as Mobile Suit Gundam 0079. This show was like 40 some odd episodes, but it's also been compiled into 3 2.5-hour movies. These are what we're talking about here, and these are what are on Netflix. So if you've been interested to see how Gundam all began, but don't necessarily have the bandwidth for 40 some odd episodes, it's very easy to watch these 3 movies and get the whole story. It does a very good job with how it edits certain events out of the series. You're not missing crucial things, and it really does effectively sell what's going on in these shows. Just for a little context, the original Mobile Suit Gundam 0079, it focuses on the 1-year war between the Principality of Zeon, who are the villains, and the Earth Federation, who are the heroes. They've been locked in this war, and suddenly mobile suits are kind of the key weapon to win this war. The Principality of Zeon has these mechas, they have these mobile suits, but the Earth Federation has the Gundam, which is a new breed of mobile suit, which is said to be a very important weapon. And so this show really gets into the psychology of war, why we fight, if something like a Gundam can be used for something good, or if a weapon is inherently going to cause damage and be destructive in the end. A lot of these shows are called space operas, and Mobile Suit Gundam really celebrates that. Like, this is a show that's just as much about the politics of war, the politics of outer space, the characters involved. Char as Nabal and Amuro Ray, who are like the centerpieces of this show, are now anime icons. Like, they're 2 of the biggest characters in the entire medium, and it's kind of cool to see how they have survived after nearly half a century of storytelling. They're still huge characters that people like to celebrate, and it's because the original Mobile Suit Gundam does such a good job with the ideas that it's putting out there. So if you've been interested in jumping into Mobile Suit Gundam, this is a great way to do it. If you've watched any of the later Gundam series, this is like a fun kind of, if you approach it as a prequel, it's kind of fun to go all the way back and get this 70s Gundam take on things. And it's just like a fun action series, but so much deeper than that. It gives you your giant robot action, but also just character studies, politics, and just so much more that it kind of epitomizes why Gundam became such a big series to begin with. So once again, for the big 3, we have The Disastrous Life of Saiki K, Mononoke, and Mobile Suit Gundam. And unfortunately, fellow otaku, that's all the time we have in this episode before I get isekai'd back to reality. We would once again like to thank Netflix, we'd like to thank Zack Snyder, Deborah Snyder, Tasha Huo, and of course, we'd like to thank you, the viewers, because without you, we've got nothing, baby. So thank you for going on this adventure with us, for always supporting anime, and you know, I don't know about you, but I'm gonna pull up Netflix and binge out on some anime. So until next time, Space Cowboys, until next time.